Hey everybody, it's me, Uncle Herbie, and we're back for another episode of Wisdom After the Fall. This being the second in the three-part series on how to, as close as we possibly can, reduce crime and violence to nothing. The first episode, I talked about the drug war, and in this episode, I'm going to talk about prison reform, which sounds dry, but it's not. Now, having been in prison before, and for those of you who are joining me for the very first time, which would be almost everybody since my viewers, I am very proud to say my first two shorts got over 1,000 views, which I'm very thrilled because it was my very first two shorts and they went really, really well. So, I mean, to me, I understand that that's nothing in the great YouTube universe, but thank you, those of you who pass them around. And oh, by the way, you got to crawl before you walk and walk before you run. And that's a good piece of wisdom that would have prevented a lot of problems for me in the past. You can't leapfrog it. So here we are, early in the process. Check out the first two videos if you want my background and the story around my own incarceration. But right now, I want to talk about having been inside. I have a very unique perspective. Not only was I inside, not only did I do time in state prison, not federal prison, which means that I was in a much worse situation. I was not in club fed, as some people call it. Um, I was in the bad kind of prison with really, really, really bad guys. And so I got a very unique perspective. And having been at the top and gone all the way to the bottom, and coming out alive on the other end, prison for me was actually a transformative experience, but I am not typical of the prison population by any stretch of the imagination. So basically, when I went to prison, just as a little side note, I took almost involuntarily, I'm going to make the best of a bad situation. Again, if you listen to the earlier, I think the second podcast that I did on my own background, you'll understand that I really don't experience fear like other people, and I have a tendency to see the bright side even in prison, which I know sounds bizarrely strange, but it's true. And for lack of a better term, as much as I possibly could, I made prison my bitch. Now, how I did that was in any bureaucracy, there are seams. Okay. And I just found certain seams and I would make myself useful to, not irreplaceable. You can't do that. No one's irreplaceable. The cemeteries are full of people that couldn't be replaced. No, but I made myself useful to not just inmates, but also to the COs and the wardens and the deputy wardens and the people that I came in contact with who immediately would identify me as smarter than the average bear inside on both yards I was on, whether both in Yuma and in Kingman, just on an IQ test. I mean, this is going to sound arrogant, but it was just obvious. I had the highest IQ on the yard of both sides of the fence. So, again, I know how braggy that sounds and blah, 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 but two things just to remember. Number one is false modesty is a lie. And I used to be just a bald-faced liar. And now outside of therapeutic lying, I don't lie at all. Therapeutic lying being like lying to your dying grandfather that he's just everything's going to be fine tomorrow when you know he's on his way out. That's therapeutic lying. Telling people harmless to anyone else. There's a good reason for it. You go to have dinner at somebody's house, it's vile. You tell them it's great because why would you be anything but polite? That's therapeutic lying. Okay, other than that, I don't lie. So anyway, I'm digressing. I'm getting way off the track. Let's get back. This is my point of view. I go in. But I did spend a lot of time talking to wardens and deputy wardens and captains of the COs because they liked me and I liked them and they would enjoy my conversation and we would talk about all kinds of things, including prison reform, including what they saw in their own bureaucracies. Remember, they were bureaucrats trapped in their own bureaucracy as much as the inmates were trapped in the prison, and they're both in this boiling stew of poisonous culture all day long. And pretty soon, the difference between the inmates and the corrections officers become thinner and thinner, and you can tell that by the ink. I mean, the corrections officers ink up like the inmates do. They're not gang ink like not all the inmates, but a lot of the inmates have. But anyway, you get the point. Mm, sorry, just dry now. So let's talk about how to fix prisons. Here's what's wrong. There's lots of going to prison. The punishment of prison isn't the prison itself. In fact, prison, as a side note, I didn't know this till I went in, is much more pleasant, if that's the right adjective, than jail. Jail is much worse than prison. But once you get to prison, it's almost like you moved from living in a barn to living in like a cheap Super 8 motel. The facilities, at least in the Arizona, now I was in the Arizona state prison system, so I can't speak to the Mississippi state prison system or the Wyoming state prison system, but I think these are all generally true because bureaucracies tend to repeat the same sort of situations. And over the years, I've spoken to inmates and inside too who did time in other states, and really Arizona, I think, is pretty typical, okay, of all the other states. Except that our inmate population is probably much more heavily Latino, than in other states. The largest group of people in Arizona prisons are the Latinos, both the foreign paisas and the domestic Chicanos who separate and hate each other. Not going to get into that too much today. And the blacks are the second largest population. However, in other states, I know that blacks make up the largest part of the prison population. But that's again, those are demographics, and I'm not going to get into racism discussions today. That's just the way it breaks down in prison. So anyway, you go in and you go to jail, and you go from jail to a yard where they say where they screen you out. They put everybody in a big room, and it's horrible. And here in Arizona, you go to Alhambra prison, which is a maximum security prison. And I was in a cell made for 14 people, and there were 28 guys in the cell, so half of them were sleeping on the floor. There's a single toilet in the middle of the room. This is real prison. This was not Club Fed. And I was there for nearly 2 weeks. And during that time, I was interviewed by various doctors, psychologists, corrections officers of various types, and basically to find out where I belonged, where I got placed in the 1 to 5 prison system. 1 yard is the least dangerous place in the prison system. A 5 yard is the highest. So they segregate the inmates to go to wherever which yard they go to. And then after that, you're carted off to the prison yard that you're going to be on. I went to my first prison was in Yuma on the La Paz prison yard. And then later, halfway through my sentence, I was moved to Kingman to the Surbat prison yard. Okay. You don't have to remember any of that. I'm just giving you some background. But the one thing that was interesting was Yuma is run by state corrections officers, and Surbat at Kingman was a private prison. And so I have a lot of insight between private and public prisons. But as far as the actual potential rehabilitation or saving of any of the inmates as human beings to live productive lives and not recidivize, if that's a verb, recidivism is the rate by which inmates end up back in prison. Right now, it's almost 100%. It's not 100%, but it's close. So, one of the things that inmates do in prison is how old is your number? So my prison number was 301231. And that'll be my number for life. If I ever got rearrested and sent back into the Arizona prison system, I'd be 301231. And the lower your number, the more times you had been in prison. So there were guys in there with 1 numbers and 0 numbers, 028, 405, or whatever it might be. And that indicated they'd been in and out of prison a gajillion times. I was a newbie. Now, if I went back in, I'd be more of an OG, an original gangster, even though they all called me OG just because of my name. I thought it meant old guy when I went in. That's how naive I was to begin with. It was like a real education. But anyway, back to the storyline. So you get sent to your various prison yards based on your risk of basically killing other inmates, how much time you have left, how violent you've been, what are the odds you're going to reoffend, blah blah blah. And child molesters, rapists, sex crimes are segregated onto segregated special yards. We called them chomo yards, child molester chomo yards, we being the inmates. I think the CEOs called them chomo yards too. I'm sure there's a fancier name for it from the state level, but they do that because the other inmates would murder all those guys, although I would consider that a public service. A lot of incest survivors in prison, and who would really, and also a crazy code of ethics. Well, you might knock up a girl and you might not marry the girl and you might not support your own kids, but if anyone raped the girl, you'd kill them. It's just, go figure the logic of that. You figure it out. I don't really understand it, but such is the nature of it all. But anyway, so this happens. And so I just learned how prison went on. Here's the problem. There's so many problems with prison, but basically you go into prison. If you get a prison job, and both yards I was on were working yards, so everybody had a job of some kind, but most of these jobs paid between 10 and 50 cents an hour. I had a very high paying prison job because I worked at a private contractor, a telephone room for an OSHA advisory firm, basically. I won't go into it. I'm not even going to name the company. I don't have permission to do it. I didn't call them first and ask them if I could mention them, and I'm not going to, I'm just conscious of, I don't want to unconsciously slur. They were fine. It was fine to work there. It was a good job. I was making $3 an hour, which by prison standards is huge. So is that what they were paying? Was $3 an hour? No, they were paying the prison system minimum wage, which in this state is I think 12.50. The difference between the $3 and the 12.50 was going to the state. So it was a money-making enterprise from the state's point of view to offset the cost of prison. Okay, and the inmates on the yard, there were a lot of guys that their job every morning was just cleaning the showers or cleaning the toilets or mopping the floors or doing janitorial work around the living areas. That we lived in like huge barns segregated by short walls and COs in the room. I was not in a maximum security prison. Lockup behind bars is maximum security prison. So when you watch television shows, the guys they always stick them in little cells, but most inmates are not stuck in little cells. Those are the guys that are really dangerous, and then that's another story, and we'll get into that. This is going to be part of this discussion. So anyway, all segregated in the yard, everyone has a job, but this little bit of money, most of these guys owe money to child support, and again, Arizona is a state that enforces child support, rightfully so. So 10% of their money gets swept off the top to pay for, which is nothing, 10% of making, 25 cents an hour for 40 hours a week, $10 a week, and they lose $1 of it to child support. And then another dollar of it goes to restitution to their victims. So they're left with 8 out of the $10. And then they smoke, they buy, at least when I would, again, time goes by and it might change a little bit, but they were all cigarette smokers, heavy. When I say all, virtually all cigarette smokers. And they smoked loosies. So they would buy loose tobacco on the prison store and roll it in papers. And that's where they would spend what little money they had. That on instant coffee and on chew. There was like the 3 prison staples: coffee, chew, and loosie tobacco and wraps to make cigarettes. And a lot of guys would roll cigarettes and sell them to other inmates. There's a whole barter economy in prison that I'm not going to go into. But all of this was done, and when they would get out at the end, they would have no money. And most of them had no family and were raised like basically wolves. And although wolves at least have a pack that takes care of them, that's not really fair to talk about wolves that way. They're raised like I don't know, like snails. Their parents pop them out and forget they exist, and they're off to fend for themselves under whatever shell they can develop. That was a weird metaphor. Or is that analogy? No, metaphor. Anyway, let's continue. So they serve whatever time they're having. If to be in prison in Arizona, you have to have a sentence of at least a year and a day or more. So, the average guy might have 4 years to go, 3 years to go. Everyone's counting down the days to the day they get out. They get out. They're taken to a halfway house of some kind. They're literally dumped on the street. And the next thing you know, they're back in prison. I've lost count how many times I'd say goodbye to somebody and I'd see them less than 30 days later, right back in the same prison. That's what they do. They just, when you violate parole or probation, they just bring you right back to finish your sentence where you were. And so I would see the exact same thing, they'd be gone. And I have some sad stories of people. I met plenty of young men in prison, and I was kind of a yard dad. Young men are attracted to me. And just like my son's friends were attracted to me because I give off major dad vibe. And I've always been non-judgmental about it. So like a kid could tell me, even outside of, when my kids would bring over their friends, a lot of them had parent issues, communicating with their parents, so on and so forth, all of whom I knew. And so I would protect the parents' interests, but listen to the kids' problems because somehow it's easier to tell, a non-family member, not a stranger. They knew me really well. A lot of them to this day still call me their second dad. And this was also true in prison. And a lot of young men I would talk to of all the different races and would walk around the track with me and sit at the table with me and tell me their problems, and I'd give them advice. And they were really one-on-one, fairly thoughtful. It's the pack mentality that is where you get into trouble. We're going to talk about that as I get into the plan itself in just a couple of minutes. But because these are not strong people. These are people that are not necessarily, most of them are not alpha males, they're beta males. Okay, and we'll get into who are the alphas and the betas, which is key to part of my program in a minute. Another little sip of water. So anyway, the point I'm making is I could tell you a couple of stories right off the top of my head. Should I tell you one? No, I'm not gonna. You know what? I don't have permission of these young men, and I'm just not gonna, no, not gonna do it. But they'll know who I'm talking about. Tremendous. I'm thinking of one right now who was a military veteran, one of the smartest young men I've ever met, had a heart as big as the all outdoors. Has a heart. He's alive, actually. I'm positive. I won't tell you why I know he's alive, but he's alive, which I wasn't entirely sure. He was definitely suicidal in a lot of ways, deeply depressed, messed up in the military, suffering from post-traumatic stress. A blind man could see it. Raised in a horrific family situation, survived all kinds of abuse and torment of every possible variety, and prison just chewed him up and spit him out. But had he been my son, my real son, he had the heart and the intellect. He would have been a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, whatever. Probably an engineer. He had a fairly mechanical mind. But I really, that was the heartbreak of it. That's the heartbreak of it. And I know where he is and what he's doing today, and it breaks my heart. Every time I see him, it's okay. I know him through social media still. Every time I see him post, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. And I know that he would have had a completely different life had I been his father. And, I shed a tear when I said goodbye to him. Anyway, it's not, you do form relationships in prison, whether you want to believe it or not. I do care. I'm sharing this with you, A, because I care about our culture and our society, but B, because I care about these young men. And a lot of them have good hearts, but they fall into horrible patterns and have absolutely no idea how to get out. So let's get down to the brass tacks. How would I fix prison? The problem in prison is there's no incentive to do anything well. That you can't expect somebody who doesn't know how to be a man, and I'm going to say woman too, but I was not in a woman's prison. Let's just assume, by the way, for the sake of this discussion, that everything I'm saying generically is going to be true of women's prisons as men's prisons. The crimes are different, more prostitution, and still tons and tons and tons of drugs, less violence, but at the very same time, probably the same basic issues. And the overarching problem in prison is you have no incentive to do well. You don't accumulate any money to help you get out, and you need a cushion. When you get out with no family, you can't get out with nothing. Then you're going to end up right back you're right back stealing and to support your drug habit, which was active during prison, which I spoke about in the last episode, so I'm not going to repeat myself. And then, you're right back inside. Okay. So let's try to break this cycle. And that starts with incentivizing behavior as opposed to here's what happens now. You're having a really nice day. Everything's cool. You're sitting at a table. For me, maybe I was writing one of my books, or I was giving advice to some young man, whatever it might be. And suddenly it's lockdown. The COs call it out. Everyone go back to your houses, prison term for where you live. You go back to your houses. Everyone gets in their rack. They lock down the yard, usually because two idiots or one idiot did something horrible, got into a fight, attacked this corrections officer, some stupid thing, one out of 1,800 guys on the yard, and the whole yard will be locked down for days. And everyone will have to strip down, take off their shirts and pants for inspections in case they have marks, even though everyone knows that the whole yard didn't get involved in this. It was just one or two brain dead, dunderheads, and who could have been dealt with separately, but the whole yard gets punished. The point is, no one ever knows who does what well, because there's no reward for anything. Not monetary, not privilege-wise, nothing. You have no reward, all punishment, all misery, all depression. Most men spend most of their days lying in their beds. Okay, now I don't really believe in psychiatric definitions. I think what we call depression is really hopelessness. And I think that the feelings we have are just anger at ourselves, turned on ourselves. But that's as an aside. But you see a lot of guys just laying there hopeless all day, waiting for the day to get out, which they know they're going to come back in. They even talk that way. There's an expectation, of this time and the next time and the next time. The recidivism rate is well over 90%. And yeah, the state can monkey with numbers, but the truth is the prison's overcrowded and the state's spending billions, and for what? So let's fix these things. So here's the way I would fix the prison system. Now, I'm covering this in brief overview. The detailed plan is in A Radical Reset. This book is available to you on Amazon by me, Herbie K, spelled with a Y, not an IE, even though I know that that's kind of the default, like Herbie the Love Bug. That's another story. Anyway, pick this up on Amazon. It's a whopping $2.99. No one's trying to get rich here. I'm trying to, start. if not a movement, just plant some ideas and then let's see where they go. I don't need to take credit for them. Feel free, if you are a talented communicator without my personal baggage and you like the plan I'm sharing, feel free to take it, steal it, and run with it. Okay, I don't care. I'm 70 years old. How much longer am I going to be around? I just like to make a little contribution, earn a little redemption in the eyes of God, as however you want to define God to be. Anyway, so pick up a copy of A Radical Reset, and everything I'm about to talk about, I broke down in detail in the book. And by the way, I think you'll know that I didn't write that book with AI. Trust me. Now that you've listened to me speak, you're going to hear me jump from the pages. And I write in a stream of consciousness, and I quip a lot, and it's a kind of an entertaining read, I think. Again, that sounds very egomaniacal. I think it's entertaining. You might think it's a piece of shit, whatever turns you on, but check it out. If you, by the way, feel like you would like to support this podcast and help me spend more time doing great commentary on not just current issues, but on life in general, and that's what's coming down the road. This is not a purely political podcast. It's a commentary podcast, and hopefully to pass on a little wisdom earned the hard way to those of you out there who might share some of the things that I do, and maybe I can give you some constructive advice from somebody who's not trying to sell you anything. So if you would like to support the podcast because you think it's worth supporting, I will send you a free copy of the book. You can go to either Patreon or buy me a coffee. Links are below, and go. And also, let's not forget the likes, subscribe, share, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to pop up any bells. Personally, even at my age, I know if I like the video, I know where to like it and how to share it. I don't think I need to tell you and show you pictures of the thing popping up. Anyway, plus I barely know how to edit these damn things. I'm a one-man operation at this point. But who knows? If I get enough Patreon and buy me a coffees, I'll maybe be able to get someone to help me edit these things. Who knows? We shall see, and have better backgrounds. That is, by the way, that you're looking out my window at Tempe Town Lake, and I live in an apartment that I share with another guy in Tempe Town Lake. We're straight, by the way, not that there's anything wrong with it. All right, so moving to the solution. So we're in a hopeless system today. So here's what I think we should do. First of all, we need to segregate the real pieces of irredeemable shit from the good guys. So instead of when you go to the screening yard here, like I said in Arizona, it's Alhambra Prison, instead of screening so much for community risk, which of course we do, but also screen for, and this is going to be my first little innovation, gang ink, okay? All ink except for art ink. In other words, if a guy, when I say ink, by the way, I'm talking tattoos. For those of you old people, I'm talking prison tattoos, gang tattoos, neighborhood tattoos. You spot them right away. I know you've seen them, maybe in a shopping mall, maybe at a gas station, you see the guy that's arms are covered up and down with kind of a gray-green ink, which is, by the way, made by mixing cigarette ash, with water, and I don't know what else they use. And they get these tattoos in prison, and it's actually very interesting. I actually have a prison tattoo that I got as kind of a souvenir getting out. I'll show it to you now. Here we go. Ready? Here we go. Here's my gang tattoo. Here's my prison tat. That's it right there. Yeah, the Star of David with OG. Okay, OG in the middle stands for original gangster. I got it just to piss off the Aryan brothers because they fucking hated me. But that's another story for another day. Being a Jewish guy. That is nice. Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to tell that story. Okay, so going down the road, everyone has this various kinds of prison ink. The first thing that I think should happen in screening is everybody mandatorily has to either agree to have all of their gang and related neighborhood, their zip codes, their phone numbers, all that prison related ink. There's a million prison related inks. I'm not going to get into the breakdown of the subculture of prison ink, but there's a lot of different prison inks, gang inks, group inks. All of that has to come off and be removed. Okay. Now, it's painful, but the state's going to pay for it. All that ink has to, and the reason for that is, it's kind of like wearing a uniform, okay? My kids went to Catholic school. And yes, Jewish guy sent his kids to Catholic school. Another story for another day when I discuss education. But let me get back on subject. Everybody wore uniforms. Now in Tucson, Arizona, where I lived, the Archdiocese of Tucson was over, about half of it was under the poverty level as far as income. Tucson's not a rich city as far as income level is concerned. So about half the students at Sal Point Catholic High School were on financial aid, particularly from the Archdiocese. We were not entitled to it being a Jewish family, but of course not. But anyway, but in order, you know what? One of the things you want to do with when you get a group of kids, and kids are cruel, you know that they'll segregate themselves by the clothes they wear, the shoes they wear, so on and so forth. Is you put them in a uniform. Uniforms, kids like the uniforms. Uniforms eliminate all the pressure of what am I going to wear to school. It eliminates all the peer pressure. Everyone wears the same uniform. At Sal Point, it was USC colors, maroon and gold. Same as Arizona State colors here in Phoenix. Maroon and gold. Behind my back, those buildings you're seeing, well, those are private businesses, but right behind them is Arizona State University. I'm right off campus. So I don't even know why I shared that, but it's just, same thing as gang colors in a way. But all that ink has to come off. And the reason for that is we're going to segregate out the hostiles from the friendlies here. We got it. The problem, most of these kids having been raised without fathers and having been raised without any male role models, and I'm talking like 99% of the time, almost everyone in prison is fatherless. By the way, that is going to be the third episode in this series, how to get rid of fatherless or reduce fatherlessness, hard word, to as close to zero as we can possibly get it in a realistic way. That's the next episode. In this episode, we're going to talk about what I am talking about, prison reform. So what we want to do is we want to get the wild animals away from the kids that we can actually have a real effect on. We're not going to save everybody, okay? And a lot of the guys that are in prison are genuine psychopaths as opposed to sociopaths. I'm going to use these labels just because they're convenient. I really am not qualified to label anybody. Just to understand in the context of this conversation, what I mean by a sociopath is, it is a person that very much resembles a narcissist, in that everything is about them and what they do, and they really don't suffer a lot of guilt about anything. And they develop it. I believe sociopathy, at least in this population, is a learned behavior, is a survival mechanism. When you're literally raised on the street and your mother's a crackhead and you don't have a father and you're running around in what passes as a yard or in front of the shitty Section 8 apartment or whatever crap hole little trailer your mother lives in with you and the children of 6 other men, and you're out there trying to control yourself, you become a sociopath, okay? But here's the thing, you're not a psychopath, okay? The psychopaths end up being the leadership of the gangs, generally speaking. The Aryan brothers that run the white guys, whatever gang runs the black guys, that changes all the time. It's a little different structure among the kinfolk. That's what the blacks call themselves, not me. Don't get on my case. The chiefs, the Native Americans, they have their culture, so on and so forth. By the way, the chiefs, I just want to say that that's a completely separate subject. They are an entirely different culture that you encounter in an entirely different way and stay very much to themselves and don't really prove a problem in prison. So while they become part of the system, I didn't know very many that had any ink, or very little of it anyway. But whatever ink there is, if you have artistic ink, multicolor ink, artistic ink, black and white, whatever it is, done by tattoo artists, you spent big money on it, but you've gone to prison and you really love this ink, and this is something, I'm not judging you, okay? I kind of like my ink too. I don't want it removed. And if that, no one's gonna make you lose that. It's all the gang-related ink. Okay, and everyone who's ever served time knows exactly what I mean. Everyone who knows anyone who's served time knows exactly what I mean. And everyone involved in the system today knows exactly what I mean. That has to go. Now, entirely voluntarily. No one's going to violate their Bill of Rights. I don't know which amendment applies to your body. I guess I don't know if it's First Amendment. Maybe it's Fourth Amendment or Eighth Amendment? I don't know. I'm not a constitutional scholar, but regardless, no one's going to violate you. No one's going to make you have a medical procedure. Okay, that's Nazi crap, and we're not going to do that. It's voluntary. But if you don't volunteer, there's a price to be paid. Now, let's start with another very simple concept I want to introduce into this discussion, which is the only teacher is consequence. Now, the consequence can be negative and the consequence can be positive. But the only thing that teaches any of us anything are the consequences of our actions. You can't be talked into being a good guy. I taught reentry classes in prison, okay? The current system, which doesn't help anybody, is about 6 months before you get out, you go into reentry classes, okay? Which is, how to do basic budgeting, how to get back in, racial relations, blah, blah, blah. I taught most of those classes. I taught them because that's one of the seams in the system was a lot of the corrections officers that had to teach those classes were not good teachers and didn't like doing it. They're fine people, it wasn't their shtick. Okay, they were put in that role because they were classified as what are called in Arizona CO3s, which is like social workers, not just corrections officers. These were good guys, but they just didn't like teaching the classes. When they saw me And, again, here comes another brag, but I'm a great public speaker. Not just good, great. And people used to come and audit my classes. The inmates would like to crowd into my classes because they were funny. And I would digress from the material, and I would talk about the real world, and I'd tell all my stories like I'm telling you as I'm talking to you. And this made for very popular classes. So, but I can tell you that no one learned a goddamn thing about it being on the outside. It was all meaningless. I had to follow the curriculum because there was a camera in the room and a recording device, so I couldn't just go off and teach them what I wanted to teach them. So I had to teach them. So I taught them the curriculum as funny and as enjoyable as I could, but it was useless. It didn't teach them anything because it was just words, blah blah. And these guys, they're all high school. 90% of them are high school dropouts. It's like they're not, functional illiteracy. Functional shit. Half of them can barely sign their names. And I'm not. It's not because they're stupid. It's they're a product of the system as it exists. Particularly at the lower end. And the danger here, and the reason that everyone should pay attention to what I'm saying is, this is the one part of our population that has healthy demographics in the sense that they're breeding like bunny rabbits. So while people who have something going for them and good families are restricting the number of children they have because basically affording it, the ones at the bottom who get extra money every time they pop out a baby are just breeding like bunny rabbits. But I digress. Back on track. So the ink comes off, but voluntarily, and I'm telling you right now, the hardcore leaders, the psychopaths. And here's what a psychopath is. A psychopath is a sociopath that when they look at you, their eyes are dead. And when they see you, you're a hamburger, and they are completely incapable of forming an actual connection. In other words, they smile, but their eyes don't smile. They're highly manipulative. They know how to work on you, but you'll never be their friend. You'll never be, and they can turn on you in just a split second, and you know them the minute you look in their eyes. Sociopaths can have deep personal relationships. Virtually, not all, but I would make a very safe guess that 80 to 90% of the politicians in national public life at the congressional level and above are sociopaths. They're not all there are a few psychopaths, but not too many. Mostly sociopaths. They don't suffer guilt, so they can lie like rugs, but they genuinely love their families, and they're capable of having a life. You don't have to be a steamroller as a sociopath. Okay, so anyway, but the other characteristic of most of these boys are, since they didn't have a father, they're followers. But the guys that are the leaders, the really bad guys, they're going to you don't have to push them very hard. They're going to get in the face of the COs. They're going to cop attitude. You segregate them out right away. They're going to refuse to get their tattoos. They go off into a separate part of the prison system. They're a small group of men. Remember now, because step one in the system was legalizing drugs, at this point, the prisons let's just imagine the prisons are at least half empty from where they are today. I think it'll be closer to 80%, but let's call them half empty. So we're saving a lot of money. The money to pay for what I'm about to suggest won't cost a penny more of taxpayer dollars. We're just going to redirect and reorganize how we do this. Okay, now all of those guys that are incorrigible, that won't have their ink taken off, put them in a yard where they can just sit there and, like Lord of the Flies, do hard labor at hard time and make their 10 cents an hour, because that's all there's going to be to it. And unless they decide to have their ink removed and play by the rules, that's where they go to serve their time. Okay, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. These are the incorrigibles, the ones that are not going to get better. Much like the chomos, where we now segregate the child molesters and the rapists, we should also segregate the leaders and the gangsters into their own yard, because they're just as poisonous in their own way to these other men because of their peer group pressure. Now what happens when you first go into prison now and you're a young man of any race, you're going to end up becoming a torpedo for whatever gang is leading your group. A torpedo is an enforcer. And your job is going to be to, wherever the leaders tell you to go, you're going to go and beat the shit out of anybody, regardless of increasing your own prison sentence, if that happens. And the idea is to work your way up the ladder to be first a run boss and then a yard boss yourself, and get cut in on the prison rackets that are going on inside through this elaborate barter to money system that goes on between inside and out, and how drugs are traded in prison and runs. So again, I can go into a lot. It's all here, okay? And by the way, my fellow inmates who I was in with, no names. No names. Nobody gets named. I'm not going to rat on anybody. Whether I think you were a good guy or a bad guy, you'll never get it out of me. Anyway, having said that, we segregate them out. Why? Because now what we're going to do is we're going to change prison time for the first, and we can argue about the length of time. I would say 8 to 13 weeks, we can decide they're going to go through essentially military basic training, um, run by either retired or ex-military DIs being paid extremely well to run them. They're going to do everything that you would do in the military, right down to how to fold your clothes, how to pack your bag, how to pack your locker, everything else. Make your bed in the morning, get up early, have a reveille, march in unison, everything but the guns. No guns. Everything else. And they're going to learn from the scratch how to be men. Now, I went through basic training. I went through naval basic training. At the time I went through, and the timing varies. I leave the details up. These are broad concepts. We can debate the timing later, but basic training was, for me, an incredibly transformative experience, and I think for most of the people that have ever been through it, and those of you veterans will agree with me that the lesson that you learn in basic training, the most important lesson to learn is that to be a good order giver, you need to learn to be a good order taker. And you need to learn to work as a group. And these young men have never worked as a group, have never taken an order, it's been every man for himself in a sociopathic, poisonous, destructive cycle, fed by the prison system, which does nothing to reward them. So they go in and out and in and out. They come out with nothing. We're going to change that. So first step one is we're going to teach them how to live. And how we're going to do that is a system that's proven after over 250 years of experience, from George Washington's camps to today: basic training, drilling, marching, working as a team, including both the hard side of basic training, the screaming, the berating, the breaking them down. We're going to run it the same way. Basic training runs like this. They spend half the time breaking you down and the next half building you up again in a whole different mold that works, and it works great. And since we know this has worked as well as anything the government's ever done for 250 years in indoctrinating young men and women into a group situation where they work as a team and yet still climb and have ambition in a ladder, digressing slightly, the military has done more for racial, the end of segregation. I mean, if you were a young black person in this country, a great career has always been to join the military. They always were ahead of the curve socially. Anyway, I digress. Back on subject. We're going to build them up. Now, if they flunk out of basic training, and even in real basic training, there are guys that flunk out and they send them home. But we're not going to send them home. They get to start over. And they'll start over again and again in that hard part, the breakdown part. And that's a consequence. Some of them are going to try to lip off to these DIs. Some of them are going to try to fight back. There's going to be some physical violence. These men know how to handle that. We will allow them to handle that. Not to hurt them, not to shoot them, not with guns. They know. Okay? And if you are a repeat offender, then we'll have segregation units where they're going to be twice as tough on you. But you will get broken down and built up. If you're just completely incorrigible, off you go to the hardcore yard, and off you go. But the vast majority, when you take the leadership out, when you take out the gangsters with the tats, who are the wolves among the sheep, let's call it, the alpha figures among the beta figures, you take them out, and then you train these young men who have new alphas will emerge, and some will blossom, certainly more than now. But what will happen uniformly, even if they just go through and do the motions, do as little as they need to do just to graduate, you have a graduation ceremony, just like in the military. You invite their families. I saw this in prison in the GED program. I got involved in teaching GED GED classes for a period of time when I was in prison. I think it was in Yuma. I get sometimes mixed up at which prison, where I did what. Maybe it was in Kingman. But anyway, I was teaching. And when they would graduate and get their GED, their general equivalency diploma, they would invite the families, and they'd come, and we'd put them in gowns, and there'd be a big graduation ceremony and coffee and cake, and for the families of the people, make a big deal out of it, because these people have never achieved anything, let alone high school graduation, and it's a big deal. And I could see it gave them a tremendous feeling, if just for a short amount of time. Well, now we're going to structure prison that as you do things, you are rewarded, and as you don't do things, you are punished. Punishment is still there, starting over, going through basic training again. But, and by the way, for those guys who physically can't do it and are too old, like me, to go through basic training, when they go into prison, that's a different story. Those are a small group of people. Accommodations and allowances will be made. I'm not going to get into those details now because I could spend all day on that. So assuming that 90% are ready to go, they graduate. We invite all their families. We do it on a big field, like at a stadium kind of, or a drill field, or an open of some kind. They march. Everything but the guns. Everything but the gun drills. They bring their families out. They're in crisp new prison clothes. They look good. They march together. Yada yada yada. And then afterwards, coffee and cake and a reward. And now they're into the regular part of prison. Now, once they're back into the regular part of prison, now they've accomplished something. They know how to operate, and the expectations remain the same. They have to fold their clothes, put them away, keep things clean, so on and so forth. The things they learned in basic training, they now know. And as time goes by, and based on time and performance, as they conform and learn and go through various kinds of positive trainings, I'll get to that in just one second, they get to earn more and more privileges. The longer and longer they go with their nose clean. They don't fail drug tests inside. They do very, very well. And as this goes by, they get, for example, when they're when they order their stored goods, their commissary goods, with the money they earn, I'll get to that in just one second. And it comes to them, the guys who are, really towing the line become preferred and get to the front of the line and get ahead of the guys that haven't earned, positive performance marks, basically. And the better they do and the longer they do it and the more the programs develop and where they're working and what they're doing, the more privileges they earn, all the way up to conjugal visits. Okay? For those of you, that's a fancy way of saying your girlfriend and or wife gets to come in and you get to have sex, okay? And in a private setting. Even work release, again, depending on the violence level, and there has to be allowances, and those are, again, all fine points and details, and there are plenty of professionals who know how to do that. But we have to restructure the program, first teach them how to operate, now in a quasi-paramilitary structure, which really works, I think. For the entire time they're in, they earn basically to become privileges, more and more privileges as time goes on, better jobs on the outside where they, for example, maybe they're working on a golf course to cut grass, but whatever job they're getting in the civilian sector, whatever company, and the state should actively recruit private employers, as they do now, but many, many more, to come and hire these inmates and train them in OJT, on-the-job training, doing all kinds of interesting things. Side note, interesting things. So I'm in Kingman Prison, and one of the deputy wardens and the captain of the corrections officers, who, by the way, was not corrupt. He was not the guy running the drugs on the yard. He was aware of it was going on, but he's not magic. Anyway, very good guy. They liked me. And a lot of times I would go into the administration building. Ostensibly, I was being called there to, sign something, do a drop. But the real truth was we would sit in an office and have coffee and talk about the world. And lots of times we'd talk about politics or business or the economy or whatever it might be and have these long and interesting discussions. And why did I bring this up? Oh, so we were talking about prison industries. And on the Kingman Yard, they had a company that was making wheelchairs. And they assembled wheelchairs from parts, I guess, that were made maybe overseas, I don't know. And they put them together, and the inmates were making like $1 an hour when the state was getting paid $12.50. Well, the problem with that is that the inmate gets, again, back to my original point, they get out with nothing. In my scenario, the $12.50, we have to restructure it. So you're getting $12.50 an hour from your employer. You're getting minimum wage, working at whatever the job might be. Let's say it's the assembling of wheelchairs. Out of that $12.50, you pay 20% or maybe 30% of that back to the state for room and board. So you get used to paying rent. You understand the difference in structure is instead of being an inmate, you're actually paying your way here. You're earning your way. So out of the $12.50, a third of it, let's call it $4, goes to overhead. Now you have $8.50 an hour left over, which now you're living like on the outside if you think about it. Okay, now of that other 2/3, most of it mandatorily, some goes to it's your child support for whatever child that you've left, or children, multiple. And part of it has to go to restitution to your victims. That goes too. But that'll leave a big chunk. Let's say half of it will be left over out of that. So you maybe have $6 an hour left over, out of which you might be allowed to spend $1 an hour in the prison store. And the other is in mandatory savings and an interest-bearing account, which they don't put it in today, at a major bank, let's say JP Morgan Chase or Bank of America or whatever it might be, and you have an account that sits there waiting for you. So when you get out, you have some money that you earned to restart your life, and you're not just tossed on the street with $20 and good luck to you. Okay, that's a huge step in the right direction. And working at a job where you're actually making real money and you have some money to spend in the prison store, and this rewarding behavior. Now, will guys screw up? Will guys do wrong things? Yes. And those guys should be segregated and punished according to the prison rules: isolation, setback, loss of job, loss of income, penalized. We can get into all kinds of discussions to penalize. God knows the prisons know how to penalize. Okay, but instead, if you keep your nose clean and you go to work every day and you climb the ladder, and even if you get promoted, let's say you're working in the wheelchair factory and you get promoted to floor supervisor, and now you would be getting paid on the outside $16.50 an hour instead of $12.50 an hour. You get that extra $4 an hour, less restitution, less child support, et cetera, less the third that goes to help support you being in prison, and everybody wins. The prison gets cash flow to help offset costs. But these guys are learning to keep a job, hold the job, be rewarded for a job, do something, and attract industry. Okay, so back to the original story. So we're in the office, and he said, what industry would you do? And I said, I don't know why you guys don't have grow houses out here. I mean, Arizona has decriminalized marijuana. Why aren't you teaching these guys to grow? We were joking around, and I said, you get grow houses out here. You pay these guys minimum wage. They learn something they really want to learn. And I was only half kidding. I'm not really kidding as I'm sharing it with you now. Why not? I mean, marijuana is legal. It's not going to no one's going to put that horse back in the barn. And teach them to be horticulturists. They love it. The industry needs them. It's a booming industry. Meanwhile, at the end of the day, you give everybody a joint on the yard. Let them go home. There'll never be violence. That was the joke. Anyway, I don't spend a lot of time on that story. But the whole point of the matter is they earn privileges all the way up to conjugal visits and even work release for the nonviolence. You get a guy that's in on a 20-year sentence because he murdered his wife in a second-degree murder in a fit of rage. Not that that's ever forgivable, but the guy was it was just a momentary thing. He's working his way up. He's been in prison now for 15 years. He's never so much as sneezed sideways. Even he can earn work release at a certain point. You reward good behavior. Again, we can debate the fine points, but the point is, instead of punishment for what some other schmuck does, it's reward, and punishment if you screw up, not for everybody. And that changes the whole dynamic. And we'll start to graduate, for lack of a better term. I'm not looking to mollycoddle anybody, but the punishment of prison is the separation from the people you love. That's the punishment, and that is unchanged. You'll still be separated from the people you love. You'll still be away from everything that you want to do. You're still suffering the punishment of prison, but in a positive way. And by the way, this has been done extensively in European countries, particularly in the Nordic countries, with great success. I think in Italy too. Positive reinforcement. Teach them something they can learn. Let them get out with a few dollars in their hands. And for the real scum, segregate them out and stick them over and let them do hard time and pound rocks. And that's the end of my podcast today. And that's how we reform the prison system. And yeah, that's it for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Do go to Amazon, pick up a copy of A Radical Reset by me, Herbie K, with a Y, both on Herbie and K. And like, subscribe, blah, 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 share, please. Have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your day. Have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your week until I post the next one. And peace out.